Well, hello everyone. Here to show you right here. I'm talking about whenever it comes to taxes, right? And so you see right here that I would put together right here, but you just said document right here, talk about for tax returns, right? But a lot of times it sure seems that way that we're going to be asking the question about whenever it comes to source of identity comes to dollar signs. So it's like a lot of times it's like, yeah, whenever we look at this right here, and want to know a lot of times, why is it that you see something like 10,000 for single, and then 150,000 for married, for especially if it's maybe for joint filing for jointly or something like that, and then children per household is 500, and income through employment right here. So a lot of times that when we do see something like this on a transcript, or maybe like if we're going to maybe seeing something like that on any source of tax document, right? And you're always want to know too that why is it that you would see something like 10,000 if filed for single, or 150,000 if married, and so it's like, yeah, so you would see something like that on a tax return, and I guess a lot of it has to do with about how they calculate, how the calculations are based upon on a tax return, right? But really though, that if we're going to be thinking a year ahead of time, and let's just say that yeah, if I were to type on here for like if I were to just go ahead and say double space right here, and for a tax filing for next year, for 2023 right here, and so it's like, yeah, so if you were to prepare the taxes for next year, a lot of times that the question kind of goes by as to where, okay, yeah, well, you don't really do the math. Like, so it sure seems that way that everybody else might say that, yeah, well, if you want to go ahead and guess what the tax amount on the refund will be, especially if there's going to maybe be a new bill that's going to be passed through Congress or something like that, if it's a stimulus check or something like that. But let's just say that yeah, that I know I mentioned before, but you're talking about for a tax credit. The tax credit would be something like tax credit per household. Tax credit per household, and let's just say if I would put on there, up to yeah, I think up to $400 tax credit or something like that per household member or something like that. So if we were to actually do the calculations here, and you're always want to know too, that yeah, that where are you getting these readings from? But whenever I look at this right here, and like everybody else, what you want to know too is to where you go ahead and figure out these calculations, right? And let's just say right down here that you put on here that yeah, I assume that if my paycheck does read an extra 10% minus 10% minus on top of the 200 yeah, on top of the 200 that I already paid from earlier. So like, let's just say that if you were to put this I don't know, and maybe if you call it maybe a scenario or an equation or something like that, but when we do the math figuring right there, let's just say that is the question kind of go by is to where, okay, yeah, you put right here on that line, yeah, you put right there on this line right here, but like everybody else would say is to where that if we were to actually think about this right here, that using this Word document right here, you go ahead and underline that right there, right? And you're thinking as to where that, okay, yeah, are you really trying to seek answers? Are you trying to seek more information about that? I am assuming that my paycheck does read an extra 10% minus on top of the 200, which I have already paid from last year. So it's like, yeah, so it seems like just a little bit like, whenever you do think about that, and you think about your tax documents a lot of times, you're always worried to where that, why is it that whenever you do, whenever you configure these digits right here, and you're always worried, too, that, that, you go ahead and you write down, like, just assume, that if my paycheck does read an extra 10% on top of the 200. And so it sure seems that way that, could this possibly go both ways to where that if you were to be working on your taxes, and let's just say that, I also, and I'm sure everybody says to where that, especially whenever it comes to the senior discounts. But still, it's like, so every time we think about that, but then also, if anybody who's maybe going to be self-employed or something like that, or if it's going to be what you call, for student loans, for student loan balances. So it's like each time we think about this, and you're always wondering, too, that working at the math right here, and let's just say that like right down here, I can go and put on here that the tax credit and also the stimulus. That a few things that you would see. A few things that you would normally see on a transcript, and then they're doing the calculations there, and so it's like, so a few of the items that you would normally see on a transcript, right? But it's like each time we look at this, at this tax, but still. But let's just say that if I were to put right here on the right side is toward, 450, and then put space right there, and then, if I were to, so if I were to write the math problem right here, like something like that right there, really, what does that really tell anybody whenever you actually do the math right there, and you're always wondering, too, is that, do you think, why is it that you would want to do the calculations that way to where, but number one, that I would probably do something like that if you were just thinking as toward, that you're just going to go ahead and assume what the answer is, or you're not really looking at the tax documents, you're just guessing what it is. But let's just say that on average that if you were to be actually working on your tax documents, right, and a 102, that especially if we're talking about making any corrections on your tax papers, and let's just say that 00, and so a lot of times the tax documents, by the way, the tax documents, by the way, especially if we're talking about Pell Grants and everything, they're not really going to accept 00 for an answer right there, but still, that when we do think about the tax documents a lot of times, it sure seems that way, that every time we do think about that, and you're thinking as to where that how exactly is it that tax documents are calculated? And the way that, like everybody else would say, is to where that, well, if you have a tax program such as H&R Block or TurboTax or some program like that, that you would have it to where that you would have the percentage. I'm like, they're doing the calculations, right, and ask you questions about that. But it sure seems that way, that that if there's anything on the tax documents, for sure, especially if we're talking about calculations, but still that each time we do think about this, and you're warned to where that why is it that maybe that we see these digits right here, especially whenever it comes to your filing status, and and I guess that there's a reason why they did it, but still that but on the other hand, that I guess that the point to where I'm making is to where that if you were to actually come up with these digits right here, these calculations, and so it's like, so if I were to write down on here, 4,000, 97, something like that. 63, and if I were to put on here comma space space there, and then if I were to also come up with a different calculation right here, and to the 2008 75, something like that. And so yeah, so if you were to be writing these digits down, and your 102 is to where that are those calculations based on how much money that you made, or those are the calculations for what you would that you would expect to see for your next year's tax return or something like that? So like everybody else would say is toward it, the number of times that you've done your taxes, that you go ahead and just write down these digits right here, just what you call like, well, you would like to see that amount of money coming to your tax return for next year. And so it's like, so you want to go ahead and look at that just a little bit like a goal, and like any source of agenda, right? But it's like that whenever you do come up with these digits a lot of times, and you're thinking this toward, that the number one, that you see these digits a lot of times, but especially if we're talking about for co-pays a lot of times, interest and in co-pays, and interest interested in co-pays. So it sure seems that way that every time we think about stuff like this, something like this, and that 102 is that that if you've done the calculations correctly and everything, but it's like that if you would actually be working the math right here, and you're warned to where that does a lot of this really add up to anything, or like anybody's thinking, as to where if you're going to be working your taxes, that you're going to be asking as to where that like whenever you see whenever you work your taxes, that you're always going to be warned to where that why is it that you see on here the 10,000 if single, and then following for married or something like that. And so you would see something like that. And so to me, though, it's almost like that those digits right there are just for how it's calculated, just by if you're going to be doing your taxes on, like if it's a 1095 or it's a 1044 tax form or something like that. But I tell you one thing, that each time I do think about these digits right here, and at 102, I go ahead and put a space in right here, that if I were to put on here, that if I were to say that 75, so if you did earn any an allowance, and let's just say that if you did earn an allowance during that period of the month or something like that, so like let's just say that an extra something like that. I'm like, I got the dollar sign right here, an extra, I'll just say an extra $15. So so if you would actually with like a slat, trying to keep it all together, right? But still that but each time we do the math like that, and you want to know too that this $15 right here, what does that really tell anybody, really? I mean, what does that really tell anybody if you were to be configuring the tax document that way, to where $15 extra, and you have right here for 75. And so it's like, if you would actually try to connect these amounts right here, and you're warned toward it, what is that all about right there? $15 extra, and $7.89, and so if you would actually be writing this, and maybe that if you were to be, I'm like, like everybody else might even say, is to where that you whenever you're going to be working your tax information, for sure that you're going to go ahead and just be doing the math yourself, doing the math, and by the time you do read those transcripts, by the time you get the tax forms based on what's been, what was updated in the system, right? And you're always warned to word that a few items that do match and for what's counted on the tax return, right? But a lot of times it sure seems that way, that each time you look at your tax documents and a 102 is to where some stuff that needs to be recalculated, and maybe if there's anything that needs to be updated and all that, but still, it's like, we're always 102 that why is it, I'm like, number one, I'm like, these tax digits, but still, but also that, about the stimulus payments, and I'm sure we all are kind of wondering about that, and it's like, stimulus, and so like, let's just say that the stimulus checks will be about, 1,500, per, something like that, per adult, but then the children, it'll be the children, the children, the children, but still, the children will receive your 500. So if you were to actually write it down like that, like U102, that that's not, really, that if you just if you normally see that just because that if that's just how you put it on the actual document, but in case of anybody that may want to know too, that just to kind of explain the long story, to make the long story just a little bit short, that this is what I was able to come up with right here, just because of the fact that from based on what I was, based on what I was guessing before it was actually calculated, before it was actually processed, before the information was processed. So so it's like a lot of times it's like we don't like putting 00 on a tax return, like in case of anybody that may want to know too, that the tax file, like, we don't count 00, so it's like that seems to be the problem whenever it comes to taking care of your taxes and knowing about what is counted. And but I tell you one thing, that whenever it comes to understanding about math, though, and working our taxes, though, and you're thinking as to where that if we would actually do the studies, though, and you're thinking as to where that this, but then from the tax, the following from last year tax return, the following from last year's tax return, so it sure seems that way, that whenever you do work on your taxes and thinking as to where just make sure that you got all the papers and required documents just to be able to file, right? And but still, that each time we do think about that, and you're thinking as to where that that makes a little bit more sense now since that was updated, and so it's like I assume that from the paycheck, but still that so it's like so when we look at our tax documents, for sure, it's like you look at these digits right here, and 102 is to where that you're hoping that you'll make a little bit more, and maybe you'll get a little bit more back next year, but it's like you look at these digits right here, and you say is to where that some of them are just a little bit off, just by a few dollars or something like that, a few cents, and if you got a few of these right, but still, so it sure seems that way, that in case of anybody that may want to know too, that if you're trying to make any corrections on a tax return, and let's just say that if you're reading from a docket, and let's just say if you put on on the tax return, but still that but when we do speak about our taxes a lot of times, it sure seems that way, that you always ask the same question, right? That the why is it that this process right here should take 30 minutes or less. The process right here should take 30 minutes or less. But I just really think, though, that they'll probably say is toward, yeah, please try to concentrate on what, like, yeah. So it's like, so every time, yeah, so, anybody, might say, too, that those tax offices for sure would probably like to have a written, some sort of document like this right here to where explaining, just to make the long story short, these are the facts of the calculations right here. All this information right here for sure. Yeah, that all the calculations right here, just to make the long story short, these are the corrections and everything, kind of like an invoice, but it's like, yeah, 30 minutes or less, and so it's like, yeah, we don't really have time to look over 15 different tax documents just to clarify, okay, what exactly is it that would need to be updated and all that, so that is why it sure seems that way, that, whenever you do think about your taxes a lot of times, it seems like it's a lot more work than what you thought it was. And you might think it's to where, yeah, well, last year, all you really had to worry about, if anything, was just to provide the information. Like, yeah, so it's like, so every time you do think about that, and you're thinking is toward it, yeah, that, that you want to know too, that, well, really, that, aren't tax documents supposed to be the same for anybody who is filing for single or for married or something like that? But still, that, each time, every year that whenever I file my taxes, it seems like that I have a totally different experience. One of those reasons, of course, like, yeah, if you do, if you recently started a new job or if you recently gotten married or something like that, but you're always want to know too that, every year that you experience a lot different than compared to what it was the last year. So it's like, it seems like it's getting harder, and I can tell just a little bit it's getting harder for me just to be able to do my taxes just because of situations. And like, yeah, if you recently started a new job or if you made a little bit more money, this year than compared to last year. So it's like, yeah, so a lot of times, every time I do think about that, and I'm always thinking as to where that, yeah, that, it seemed like it took a lot longer this time than compared to last time just to be able to get everything all squared away. And that's why it sure seems that way, everybody, that, yeah, that, just to kind of get an idea about what is going on and any corrections that need to be made. So that's why it sure seems that way that you go ahead and come up with a, maybe a little bit of a rough draft, like a draft, to where you go, like an invoice, maybe just a little bit like an invoice, to where that you go ahead and you set a Word document and save it, and then get, like, just to kind of get you an idea of what you want to work with for the next year. And, but anyway, but it's like to do your best, right? But still, that's the one thing I want to talk about right here. Talk about, for assume that if my paycheck does read an extra 10% on top of the 200 that from what I already paid from last year. So anybody who's going to be working in a tax office who's going to read that, and they're going to wonder, okay, what exactly is it that you're saying? Are you saying that you made an extra $200, or you would like to see an extra $200, or like anybody else would say, that the way I put it is to where, yeah, you might see an extra $200 by next year, but still. So it's like, yeah, so it's like, if you would actually write that, and like everybody say, well, can you please share that with us? Can you please explain what is it that you're talking about? And I'm like, well, really, that when I'm talking about, I can go and explain right up here as to where yeah, $200. $200, your $200, and then if you would actually use it $200 plus $200 plus 5 or something, or $200 plus 10. That's on top of the hours that you worked at your job, right? And if I were to put on here, you yeah, 200 200 yeah, $200, 200, and if I were to, yeah, would that be multiply or would that be subtraction or something like that? Multiply that, times, yeah, times 30 or something like that. I'll just use that, about every 30 days. Yeah, I'm trying to keep it all together here. Yeah, I know. Okay, you can go ahead and just make some space over here if you like, but still, yeah, 30 days. So it's like, yeah, so each time we do think about that in 102, yeah, it's just a little bit confusing, right? So it's like, whenever you do work the math right here, and it's like you're always 102 that you want to go ahead and kind of put that into like a scenario. And 102 that you're really not everybody's really going to understand what is it that you're talking about here, and so that is why it seems like if you're going to be having these discussions with anybody about their tax dollars amounts, for sure that you would at least please save a copy of that so that way for your reference, so that way you can share your thoughts and opinions about what you think about that. And but really that I'll even tell everybody that nowadays it sure seems that way, that $200. I'm like, but still, $200 is just not a whole lot of money. In the way we think about that though in 102 is to where you want to know is that whenever you do the calculations right about the math, and the 102 is like $200 plus 10, and that could be about maybe 10 days that you were working out of the whole period on top of the $200 that you were expecting, that you were hoping to make and all that. So really, to me though, that sounds like just a little bit like you want to go ahead and write that just to kind of configure that in 102 that, okay, yeah, you were hoping that you would make that much, but still. So it's like, yeah, so every time I do think about that, and I'm always kind of rounding in the digits, and people are probably thinking as to where, okay, yeah, that, I really think that, if you're going to be rounding the digits, if it doesn't match with what's on the document for sure, then that's not taxable. But anyway, so these right here, that's just basically that's what I was thinking about. But still, that when we do talk about our taxes a lot of times, that we're also talking about is that that if you looked at your tax documents and if you would actually give it an estimate, if you actually do the math and say that to go ahead and do the math in 102 of those, if that's close enough, that's close enough to what you configured, and most of the time it's like, if that's close enough, your best estimate is fine, close estimate, and I guess so it's like, every time you do think about that, and you're always 102, but that's close enough. But close enough to what you were trying to configure. But still, that whenever we do talk about our taxes, though, that it sure seems that way. That that you're always asking the question that you're 10,000 for filing for single and 150,000 for married. But anyway, that's what I think about. But anyway, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.